Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Christopher Ludwig here, Editor-in-Chief, Automotive Logistics, and welcome to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live. Apologies to those of you for the slight delay and a few technical issues, but we're back online and on stream, and anything that was cut off prior will be available on demand. So apologies again from that, but let's crack into this next session, powering the electric vehicle revolution, such a relevant topic. And we have, I believe, the company, one of the most interesting companies to talk about it with, indeed. You can't look around the world right now and see a greater transformation happening than at the Volkswagen Group, which is at the midst of a huge model offensive. We have the first customers receiving the ID.3. We've seen startup production of the ID.4 and more to follow. And at the heart of this is a real change in production with the new MEB platform, which is underlying so much of the new models and converting a number. And Volkswagen continues to convert factories to electric vehicle production. Amongst those producing, or soon to be producing this model, is the Transparent Factory in Dresden. And I'm very pleased to welcome Danny Auerswald, who's the plant manager in Dresden. Danny, thanks so much for joining us. And Danny will give us some insight into the transformation from a production and supply chain side, which is happening in Volkswagen, in Dresden, and also in Saxony more broadly. We'll pick up after his presentation for some great Q&A as well. So Danny, I'm gonna hand over to you, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to everyone for the nice introduction. My name is Danny. I'm the head of the Transparent Factory here in the beautiful town of Dresden. And I would like to share with you some insights how we at Volkswagen manage the transformation and what journey is still ahead of us into that electric age of the new cars and the automobility. So first of all, I would like to give you some facts about the extent how our business is going to change or is already changing. Just to show you that we are really serious and that we mean business when it comes to that electric cars. Overall, Volkswagen Group is investing 60 billion euros in mobility, electric mobility, and digitization. So that means not only for the powertrain itself, but we also reserve more than 30 billion for new software in the car. And as you know, it's not only about changing the powertrain and making a combustion car into an electric car. That all comes with a whole new ecosystem. You have charging services to consider. You have to make sure that your customers are always online and that you can handle all the data that it's produced. And the traditional automotive sector was not really familiar with that. So that change hit us quite hard in the past. So the board of management and also the supervisory board decided to really make a big splash into that topic and to be ahead of that whole new change that is facing towards the automotive industry. So as I said, more than 30 billion are invested for electric mobility. That means changing the production plants itself, developing new products, and also making sure that, let's say, you have enough charging infrastructure available, at least as a trigger for more to follow. That means all that money is spent in 75 new models when it comes to purely electric cars, so-called BEV units, and 60 PHEVs. So that means hybrid cars that are either normal combustion cars that are facing the same or changing and sharing the same platform when it comes to all our models across the brand. So it's not only talking about the brand VW, that also includes Audi, Skoda, Seat, only to name some of them, and of course our commercial vehicles as well. So the target is, and I think that's mainly driven by the market demand and also by political constraints, to sell until 2029, 26 million electric cars and additional 6 million hybrid cars on top of that. I will come to that in a second, how this is, let's say, distributed worldwide. As you know, the battery is the key function or the key USP for the car when it comes to the range, when it comes to the charging time and so on. So that's definitely the let's say the center or the focus topic for all our activities here at Volkswagen. And considering the high amount of cars we want to sell, for sure you can imagine that the ordering volume in the battery and the cell production itself reaches up to 50 billion worldwide. The good thing is, from our point of view, from my point of view, we are right in the middle of the change, not also when it comes to the progress, but especially when it comes to the location. As the kickoff started 100 kilometers away from here in Zwickau, which is the first plant that is changed or transformed into a pure electric car plant. I will come to that later on, how that change was started and what challenges we are going to face in the very near future. And I think when it comes to the media feedback, you know that the ID.3 is one of our most important models at the moment. Luckily, so far the production is going pretty well. All the software issues that were mentioned in the past are solved. So we actually delivered the first car, or I had the honor to deliver the first car here out of Dresden to the first customer. And the media itself responded very positively about the character and the drivability of the car. And so we are looking forward to produce many more. And as it was mentioned in the beginning already, that's only the first stepstone into this whole ID family. But I will come to that a bit later. Okay, when you look at the numbers, the 33 billion that will be invested into electric mobility, the main driver besides the development is of course the production equipment. And considering the high number of cars we want to sell, you also need very high production capacities that are basically scattered all over the globe. For sure, we start here in Germany with the rollout of the so-called MEB, which is the new platform for all our electric cars. And the target is to have in total 8 plants up and running until the end of 2022. Zwickau was already mentioned, which is basically the first mover when it comes to the MEB integration. Dresden is already in the middle of the integration of the MEB. At the moment, we are producing the EGolf, which is basically the normal Golf 7 with a pure electric powertrain, and we are really overwhelmed by the demand. So especially when it comes to these support programs that were started after the COVID crisis to give some positive impulses to the automotive industry, let's say tax incentives and the cashbacks from the government, especially here in Germany, are rather high, which help us to push more cars to our customers. And at the moment, we are really running at the capacity level when it comes to the EGolf, and in parallel, we face a challenge to make the factory ready here for the ID.3 that will start beginning of next year. So Hanover is more focusing on commercial vehicles, the light commercial vehicles, the so-called bully, and Emden is going to produce also an SUV in the very near future. Skoda recently showed the world premiere of their electrical car that is produced in Mladá Boleslav, and the big benefit of having the common platform is you have everything developed only once, and then you put the different design and let's say the brand image on top of the car, which is significantly reducing the development efforts when it comes to a separate car. And that's why we have quite a high number of models available. The 75 I mentioned earlier will share the same platform, different sizes, yes. But at the end of the day, the technology underneath the car or the chassis is more or less very similar. That was very European centered, since we are facing additional constraints and quotas also in China. We are producing the MEB also in the very near future in Anting. That is a completely new plant, and in Foshan that is also some kind of integration similar to what we do in Dresden. I'm not sure if, or the ones who are familiar with the Chinese market might know that there's a certain quota system in place, that for every combustion car you want to sell, you also have to sell a certain amount of electrical cars. And the competition here is very high. You have a lot of new brands that are popping up from nothing, that are also want to participate in that big momentum now when it comes to electric mobility. So we definitely have to focus on that one as well in order to keep our market share where it is at the moment. Chattanooga is always in the focus when it comes to the electric strategy for the US. I think that's also one of the big changes that came with the diesel crisis in the past. That Volkswagen is still working hard to reestablish the positive image we had in the past in the US. So that will be one of the main hinges when it comes to that strategy, to also produce the ID.4 very soon for the US market. So that will be one of the key elements for the future strategy of Volkswagen in the US. And that's only for our plants here. The other brands in the beginning will share the same plants, and then depending on the growth rate of the mobility, the other plants will be following. Okay, what is our rollout plan? I mentioned already the focus on the European market and China. For sure, there are reasons to achieve the very ambitious emission targets. You might have heard from the European Commission that are currently discussing to further tighten these let's say the limits for these emissions. So for sure we have to react and see what the future model mix will be in order to achieve these ambitious emission targets. For China goes the same, and US is, considering the market share here, relatively small numbers compared to the other big markets, but considering our market share in the US market, I think the number here is already also very ambitious. So the target is clear, the roadmap is clear. Volkswagen Group wants to sell more than 1.5 million cars a year. And as you can imagine, on average, a normal plant or our usual standard plant size is 300,000 cars a year. So these 8 plants we want to change are definitely necessary to be ready by then in order to fulfill all this output and to fulfill the market demand. Okay, producing the car is one thing, yeah, or driving the car with 0 emissions is one thing. But if, as we are serious about that carbon dioxide avoidance plan, we are not only focusing on the usage of the cars that are ideally driven by green energy, but also on the supply chain, on the production. So it's not enough that we try to produce the cars with 0 emissions, or at least to minimize emissions and to compensate the remaining emissions by using certificates. It's also very high pressure on the supply chain. So when it comes to these emission targets, the focus also for our purchasing department is more on CO2 emissions and how these suppliers produce for us. So that means they also get clear targets. And especially for the batteries, I already mentioned that as one of the key factors for the cars. The renewable energy that is used will be one of the main criteria for the supplier selection. And also when it comes to the targets they will get over the life cycle, this is very much in focus towards our strategy of CO2 emissions until 2050. So that will be one of the main focuses And production is I think clear. Here we try to use renewable energy for the production itself. Dresden is already CO2 neutral, so that means whatever emissions are produced here during the production of the car, as well as the delivery, for instance, to the customer, this will be compensated by using certificates. And in the meantime, we are focusing on getting not only CO2 neutral certificates, but also CO2 free certificates, that we generate our electricity 023, that we generate the heat we need for the production equipment, also CO2 free. So that's clearly the target here, to not only rely on certificates, but also to really reduce the actual emissions and not only compensating it. For the usage, I think that's clear already and well established, that our sub-brand Elli is offering green electricity for the customers. So that means you have this charging card, and by using that card, you already know that your car is charged emissions free. And this is one of the main pillars when it comes to the ecosystem I mentioned in the beginning, that everything here is, let's say, fitting into another, and that we have this whole ecosystem streamlined towards the customer, that he gets the car produced CO2 free and that he can drive the car CO2 free. And the last point here, the recycling, is always a critical point, what to do with the cars after they reach the end of their life cycle. That you either use the batteries and retrofit the cells. And there's also a different, or several different ideas what to do with used batteries, like some kind of storage for other renewable energies, to save this energy, or to store the energy, for instance, from solar cells, and to keep it during nighttime. So I think that's this whole framework we have to consider when it comes to carbon dioxide reduction. And that was also pretty new for Volkswagen in the past, as in the past, usually the business case for us ended after the car is delivered to the customer, and ends at the aftermarket, or ends during the after sales. So here we really have to consider the entire life cycle, and already think about what to do when the cars return after they reach the end of the life cycle. So what have we done in the past already to compensate and to reduce the CO2 emissions? As you can see here, the launch of the ID.3 took place already. So Q1 has passed, and we have achieved already quite a lot. So the production capacities and the production facilities itself were established now in a very energy efficient way. And whatever was not possible to reduce any further is now being compensated by certified projects. For instance, we have several rainforest projects going on to generate these CO2 emissions by getting well-established joint venture partners, and then to use these certificates to offset the generated emissions. And as I said, the suppliers are also pretty much in focus when it comes to the life cycle emissions and the emissions during the supply chain, not only during the production of the parts, but also when it comes to the transportation process. So for instance, we pushed our cars now, the ID.3 cars, CO2 neutral by using the railroads, and they are also required to use green energy, so that not only the supply chain itself until producing the cars, but also sending the cars to the customers is now CO2 neutral. And for sure, we don't stop here. So also in the pretty near future, we are focusing on further optimization when it comes to production of the cars, and also to handing over the cars to our customers. Okay, I mentioned already we are more or less in the center of the change. Zwickau was already mentioned. That's the biggest plant. I will come to that in a minute, but let me allow to talk about Dresden a bit more in detail. So in actual fact, we have made that change already in the past towards electrical cars. So the Volkswagen EGolf is produced solely here at the moment. Until end of this year, we are reaching a new production record, so to say, by producing 16,000 cars a year. That was basically new for everyone here, and took also quite some headaches how to get these cars out of the plants on time. But now we managed to have the line ready and to fulfill the remaining customer demand until end of this year, until or before we change to the ID.3. So and besides Dresden, we have Volkswagen Chemnitz, which is basically the engine producer for the brand. Normal combustion engines and the PHEV engines. So also from a strategic point of view, they are very important to fulfill the target of 6 million PHEV cars until 2029. And Volkswagen Zwickau, which is the biggest plant here at Volkswagen Sachsen, which is now completely changed towards MEB and towards electrical cars. So just to give you a short overview or an example, how the change or the transformation process took place. So until 2018, Volkswagen here in Zwickau produced only combustion cars, and then the decision was made to fully convert that big plant with this long history in production to a complete electrical plant. And as you can imagine, it's not only making the decision and bringing in the new production equipment. It's also a lot of change processes to take place in the heads of our employees. So to really show that electric mobility is the future, and that there's basically not that many alternatives, and it's better to be a fast mover and to be ahead of the crowd when it comes to that change, and to be really the first plant that is fully converted at a big scale with the MEB. So at the moment we are in the change process. The last combustion car was produced, I think, 2 months ago. So since then, Zwickau is producing only MEB cars, and it will also be a shared platform. So that means they are starting with the ID.3. They started already, and the ID.4 as a next member of this ID family is about to start. And I think the market introduction will take place end of this year, and then we also follow with that here in Dresden. And the overall capacity is even increased compared to what Zwickau did before. So the mentioned 300,000 are even slightly overachieved in terms of capacity. And for sure, we are hoping that whatever car is ordered will contribute to that high number, that we really can utilize all the capacity that is currently invested in. For Dresden, as I said, the change to electrical cars already took place with the introduction of the EGolf. Dresden started in 2001 with the production of the Phaeton, and after its EOP, the EGolf was introduced here. Yeah, so to be it makes me kind of proud that Volkswagen here really made this change to a full electric factory already in 2017, and now it's an MEB, or it will be an MEB factory from first of or the first quarter of 21, whereby now we are producing, as I said, at the capacity limit until end of this year to fulfill the market demand, especially for the German market, before we complete the transformation also here towards MEB. And as you can imagine, all this takes place in parallel. So besides running the capacity on full swing, the factory here on full swing, we also have to consider the pre-series cars and to do all the testing to be ready for the start of production beginning of next year. So at the moment here, the pressure is rather high, but that also shows that the brand and also the group is really committed and don't think that this is only a very small and temporary limited activity. But now, with a good example from Zwickau and also the good example from Dresden, I think the other plants will follow or have to follow, so that we are really making big progress on that path of transformation, and looking forward to have more models of the ID to be presented to the public very soon. Okay, so that's it from my side. Now I'm looking forward to hear your questions or just to have a brief discussion about that transformation process. Thank you. Hello, any questions?
Apologies, Danny was caught backstage there for a moment, but thank you so much for that presentation and overview and giving me giving us such a insight into the transformation plans which we're seeing. Really glad to have you for some Q&A now. We'll run a little bit later than the original schedule so that we can have some of that time. So at least next 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so we'll do that. So we've got some questions already.
I have to leave at 10:45, so which should be
okay. All right, then
we'll
use the next 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Precisely, because I appreciate the pressure there. So can we just talk, since you're converting to this MEB production now, and I appreciate the pressure is on there to do that, what are some of the most significant, important measures that you need to take in terms of the tooling, equipment, workflow, to move from the EGolf to the ID.3?
Yeah. I think the biggest benefit here is that we are already familiar with the electric cars. Otherwise, I would definitely say, besides the equipment and the tooling, I think safety is the biggest concern. As you really have these high voltage batteries here that are already reaching the plant partially charged, the qualification for our operators is usually the main concern. And you really have to focus on that one to make sure that everyone is aware of the safe handling for these batteries and what wires and what cables to touch and which are not to touch. So I think that's the biggest transformation when it comes to people's mindset to really be careful when it comes to these high voltage cars. And besides that, the good thing is it's an established platform already. So the changes when it comes to the assembly process are luckily rather limited. For sure, you have different jigs and fixtures to use, but this whole, let's say, logic of the platform itself means that you only have to do it once, and once you have the right platform at hand, there are only minor changes required. So I think when it comes to the assembly process, it's for sure we have some new driver assistance systems and all the technology that comes to the car, and especially the software and this let's say updates over the air are the biggest product related changes.
Absolutely. So in terms of the efficiency of the production, whether it's Zwickau or Dresden, and my understanding is the MEB brings quite a bit more production efficiency compared to the previous platform, which obviously had to account for both the ICE versions and the EV. How does that kind of translate in terms of the production and supply chain that you're working with?
I mean, as you said, the biggest benefit is that the car was purely developed as electrical car. When you compare the EGolf and the ID.3, the architecture of the car is very much streamlined, which makes it way easier to follow certain assembly processes. And for sure, that's also produced in a way when it comes to design for manufacturing, that it was already in the focus of the development of this car, how to make things easy. For the EGolf, for instance, to change a ICE car into an electrical car, you have to accept certain disadvantages when it comes to production processes, how to fit the battery cell, for instance, into the platform of the car. And when you compare the battery of an EGolf that is using every small inch that was available in the chassis of the car, and compare this with a chocolate bar battery size or battery shape of a ID.3, you can imagine that this car was really designed around the battery and considering all the existing production equipment. So to come back to the question about the efficiency, we are really grateful to have that streamlined car that makes it way easier to follow the well-established production processes instead of having to take some detours due to the car architecture.
We had a question from the audience pointing out that as electric vehicles have fewer components, the question is specifically, does this reduce inbound logistics transportation? And I guess I would sort of extend that a little bit also to say, does that also, have a bearing on the assembly processes and as well? Obviously, if there's fewer modules putting together as opposed to handling more parts.
Yes, I mean, it's definitely true. There are way less components, so which makes it a bit easier for us when it comes to the assembly process and the logistics process in terms of parts handling and the in-house logistics efforts. And I think the strategy across the board is clear that you think about more modules. So instead of having everything assembled in-house in the plant, you try to reduce the complexity and outsource the module assembly in a way that, for instance, this whole front end is coming pre-assembled, which was done in the past as it was more complex and bigger sized internally. Now it's more outsourced and coming from external, as also the number of variants has reduced significantly.
So that's interesting. There are more modules which previously had been assembled or pre-assembled on site, for example, by Volkswagen, and now would come from the supplier,
Exactly.
which perhaps also has a bearing on where the location for some of those modules are assembled.
Yeah, especially when you consider the CO2 footprint.
Yeah.
So in the past, I mean, I think everyone in the industry sourced from very far distances. And was always only interested in the so-called A price when it comes to the part price itself. But now I think the cost of transportation and the CO2 emissions that are emitted during the transportation itself are more and more in the focus. And you also have to put a price tag onto this, and that's why this whole module strategy also need to be considered not only from an angle of the pure efficiency and the pricing itself, but also when it comes to distance and transportation method.
That's very interesting, and as you point out there too, so not only considering the location, but the cost and the CO2 impacts and how that comes together. So that very interesting, I think, for our audience to note that as they are logistics specialists. The top voted question, with the additional production of electric cars, are there any technology investments or shift in your supply chain strategy? So that's part of what you've been outlining there. But is there any specific examples of new technology in the production or supply chain which this has led to?
I think when it comes to the efficiency or the transparency in handling all the data, I think the cloud we are about to establish has the biggest impact. So at the moment, we have this cooperation going on with Amazon to not only focus on our production equipment to be connected in the cloud and to have a proper steering and handling of all the big data, but I think also the supplier business is heading more and more into that direction to really have a smooth and seamless transition from supplier data into the factory towards sales. Because usually you have this process backwards. You have the customer demand, production is doing the planning, and then the supplier gets the data last. So I think that will have significant changes in the very near future as the data is basically transferred online and in real time. So there's no time gap anymore. And I think when it comes to the flexibility, this makes it way easier to have the data firsthand and to make the corresponding changes if necessary.
It also seems particularly relevant given, for example, 8 plants producing on the same platform, that you'll have a much more networked production, if you like, IT system that can share that data information and also processes to optimize across the plants as they ramp up.
Yeah, especially when it comes to common parts, that you can easily shift from one plant to another if necessary, before the lorry itself reaches a destination. So I think that's.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're running low on time. So maybe just the last quick, since we have a global audience listening here of logistics experts, supply chain experts, what would your parting message to them to be? The help that Volkswagen sort of needs, the innovation and that it would like to see and support from its supply base and logistics provider base to help you reach those very ambitious targets that you set.
I think the supplier network itself is really well established, and so far I think everyone, especially with the launch of the ID, did a great job to have that car developed in a very short time and in a very good status. So I think that flexibility is really needed, and when it comes to the focus, we all have to make sure that we are, let's say, facing into a world that is more connected, and the focus also from the customer is heading more towards connectivity and customer experience or user experience than having a chassis that is basically driving without any noise. So I think we also have to focus on these additional tasks when it comes to the future supplier network.
Fantastic. Well, Danny, that's a great note to leave it on. I want to thank you for your insight today and sharing this with our audience. And we look forward to keeping in touch and following up as you get that ID.3 up and launched and sharing more learnings on that side. Appreciate you got your hands full with running full production and transitioning. So everyone who understands the world of production supply chain knows that that's not an easy thing to pull off.
It's not boring. That's true.
No, it's certainly not boring. Yeah, absolutely. Well, fantastic insight. Thank you so much.
Christopher, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch, and thanks again for our audience for tuning in and giving you great questions. This session, as others, will be made available on demand, probably by the end of the day. And you can also keep catching up. We have had a lot of great sessions on electric vehicle production and supply chain, so do check back on those. And you go to the schedule, you click on past content, and you can see all the sessions that are available on demand as we continue to add them. Also, don't forget, we've got a short break now, so use all the time you can to network, use the Brella platform for matchmaking, send meeting requests, and also answer meeting requests. That's a key message too. Don't leave people hanging. A quick word of advice too: if you're setting up video meetings, avoid using Safari. We've noted a few issues with the Safari browser, so do try to use Chrome or Firefox or Opera or another browser, and that should be an more optimal experience. So keep up with that. We've got more coming up at 10 a.m. UK, 11 o'clock Central. We have a spotlight on the supply chain with commercial vehicle manufacturers. In fact, some, let's say, cousins of Danny from MAN and Scania will be, not literal cousins, but let's say Volkswagen Group cousins. We'll be sharing some.
We are all one big family here.
Exactly. That's my thing, especially across the supply chain. So don't miss that coming up shortly. And for the meantime, Chris Ludwig signing off here. Thanks again to Danny Auerswald and Volkswagen. We'll see you again real soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.